we have about now close to 1,000 startups, which, by the way, for context, is only second to US.
Obviously, it's an enormous population. It's the largest democracy in the world.
There is a massive, massive flow of legal work from in-house departments across the world in bigger MNCs being moved to India.
You won an award not too long ago, Influential Women in Legal Tech.
The heads of innovation or the heads of knowledge or what have yous are mostly women. The biggest issue is...
Welcome to Without Limitation. This is the podcast where we meet the people who are reshaping the legal industry. Now, if you had to guess, what is the second largest legal technology market in the world by number of startups, you might assume perhaps it's the UK or Canada or Germany or something like that. But the answer actually is India. Well, I didn't know this until I sat down with Shreya Vajpei. Shreya is known to many of you as the founder of the Indian Legal Tech Network. It acts like a bridge that connects the startups and the startup ecosystem in India with the rest of the world, but also, importantly, the rest of the world with India. And India is a really interesting market. Aside from being the largest democracy in the world, there's a thriving legal economy there, a very large number of law firms. But to outsiders, it can be a difficult market to wrap your head around. How do you launch a product there? What sort of pricing makes sense? And on the flip side, for Indian startups scaling into the rest of the world, and there are a growing number of those, how do they adjust their offerings so that they work outside of India? We talked about all this and more. Shreya, like many of the guests on the podcast, has had a really interesting career journey. She has done everything from marketing and BD in law firms. She's practiced law in large law firms. And these days, she runs innovation functions in law firms, and she's done it in multiple jurisdictions. Really interesting conversation. Shreya, I just think, is one of the most interesting people in legal tech. Lots to learn from her, and I think you'll find this conversation really useful. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Shreya Vajpei. Shreya, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here, Matt. I'm very excited for this conversation.
Well, me too. And we've got a lot to cover. And we were just discussing a little bit about your background and how you got into innovation. And I think people would love to hear more about it because you followed a super interesting path, I think, from practicing law to moving across through BD and marketing into an innovation role. So can you just share a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I started out as a practicing lawyer at a tier 1 law firm in India called Khaitan & Co. At that point of time, we were about 800 lawyers. Now, of course, it's like that number of lawyers. But just for a comparison for the audience, it's sort of like the Magic Circle equivalent. It is the top tier firm within the Indian ecosystem. I did that for a couple of years and somewhere realized that I wanted to do more in terms of what I did at work. And by more, I mean I wanted to be more multidisciplinary. And of course, law gives you that chance. Like you can be a space lawyer or a fashion industry lawyer or what have you. But when I say multidisciplinary, I mean around actual disciplines. So I wanted to venture out and see what else was there. And from there, I moved to a practice development role, which initially focused a lot on marketing and PD at a law firm. But then COVID happened and there was no marketing and PD to do. Like the budgets obviously just instantly dried up overnight. And our entire team became a lot more focused on internal efficiencies and improvements in operations. So I did a lot of admin, IT, HR across the board. It was about 100 lawyer firms, so we were able to handle all of that. And from there, it became almost like the managing partner's office. So we were looking at things like pricing strategy, opening a new office in a new city. How are our partners doing? Are we cross-selling enough? Strategic hiring, other sort of projects. So really whatever landed at their table also landed at our table. And I think that really completely changed how I looked at law as a profession. Because when you are a practitioner starting out, you're looking at it from a very bottom up perspective, but this gave me a very holistic view and honestly made me realize that law is a business at so many levels. And from there, Ketan was starting out their innovation teams. I was one of the first hires to help set up the innovation function within the firm. And yeah, I think over the course of time, AI became big and my role kept evolving as the demands and the needs of the firm kept evolving.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and somewhat I think it gives you such an advantage to have seen different aspects of a law firm. And I do think that, I was probably guilty of this when I was in practice, and certainly for some practitioners, it's easy to be very much focused on what you're doing day to day and your practice and your clients, and to somehow lose the bigger picture. And I also think we're entering a period, not just in law, but across all industries, where the idea that you only do one thing, you just do marketing, or you just do sales, or you just do UX design or engineering, or just one aspect of law, and that's it, I think is going to come under some pressure. I think we're all going to need to be a little bit more full stack, or maybe even kind of like T-shaped. Some people talk about that term, where you've got broad expertise or capabilities across a number of areas, but very deep expertise in perhaps one or two areas. So, your background is a great, I think, example of that. So you moved into innovation, and then obviously more recently, you've moved to the UK with a role at Stevenson Harwood. And I really want to get into it's not just multidisciplinary now, it's multi-geographical as well. I want to get into that. Before we do, tell us more about the move and the thinking and the opportunity that came up at Stevenson Harwood.
Sure. The move really was driven by the fact that I wanted to be in a more mature market. And by mature, I mean not just in terms of profession, which of course, right, the common law that India borrows is mostly based around the law that you have here, but also from a curve of innovation and digital transformation. Just generally, law firms in the UK have been doing it for much, much longer. You've had document automation teams for a lot longer. You've had much consistent digital transformation and IT budgets for a lot longer. You've had innovation teams also for 10 years longer than India has had. So all of that puts the entire ecosystem much ahead, further along on the journey of innovation and innovation maturity.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously biased to someone who lived in Singapore for 7 years, but I do think that to the extent that anyone has an opportunity to go live and work in another country, I think it's just one of the best things you can do career-wise, and just would strongly recommend it to anyone really who has that opportunity that comes up. Let's talk more about some of what you were covering there around, UK versus India and some of the differences. So, you're really an expert in the legal tech scene in India, right? So you set up the Indian Legal Tech Network, which I think is sort of the number one community for legal tech in India. Why did you do that? Let's maybe start with that, and then we'll probably come on to a little bit more detail around some of those differences and opportunities perhaps that you see between the Indian market and the UK or the US market.
Sure. So why did I do that was mostly because of frustration of not having enough people to talk about all of this. Like, there were excited people. There were people who were excited on both sides of things. Like, there were engineers who were very excited about law and what's happening in this ecosystem. And there were lawyers getting fairly excited with ChatGPT 3.5. So this quite honestly came out of a couple of us deciding to catch up over coffee. It was a friend who was working more on AI literacy and also legal literacy as a function, because that's a massive issue and a pain point in India. People don't fully recognize and realize what their rights are. And the incentives are built in a way that there are very few systemic reminders of that. And we want to catch up to see what's happening, what am I doing, what am I learning? And to that conversation, we invited a few more friends and we were like, do you think people will show up if we put this up on LinkedIn? And we did on a Tuesday. We were going to meet on a Saturday, I think. We had 50 signups and 30 people showed up to that first event. And that was clearly the sign to do something more. And this was like one city. And to be very honest, in the context of India, for everyone who's sort of tuning in, Bombay is not really known as the tech capital. The actual things and like a lot more discovery and experimentation ends up happening in Bangalore. And we knew that if we like went there, there was going to be a lot more. that we could do. And from there, we did one event in Delhi and one in Bangalore. And again, like 50 people showed up on each of those. And these were like we got a coffee house hoping people would show up, and a lot showed up. And yeah, we just formalized it, got more people involved, and it just like kept growing from there. And last year, we were able to work with the Department of Business and Trade to get a contingent of legal tech startups from India all the way to the UK to meet Magic Circle law firms and Scottish law firms, and also be here for the Legal Tech Talk event.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk more about that. For those who don't know the Indian market very well, I know it's a complicated market, but could you just sort of briefly introduce the market? There are some interesting nuances there around the ability for international law firms to set up there. As you say, it's also a very large country geographically in terms of population. There's some massive cities there. It's quite a unique market in a number of different ways. And I know that some legal tech vendors, when they try and sell into India, law firms trying to figure out how do we set up there or partner with firms who are there, it can be quite hard to wrap your head around. So would you just be able to kind of paint the picture of the Indian market?
I'm going to try my best because the picture is really big.
It's a big
So
question.
maybe it's just like an outline
Yeah,
instead of like
let's
the full
start there.
picture. All right. So in terms of I'm going to start with how big the market is. So the market is not very big when you compare it to UK. It's about 1/5 the size. It's like 10 to 15 billion USD in terms of just market size. And then within that, it is very, very balkanized, right? It's like disparate, different sizes, extremely unconsolidated in that sense. The law firm side of things, there are top 5 law firms which are similar in size, similar in terms of focus area, similar in terms of revenue, partners, prestige, what have you. Then, and about like 1,500 lawyers to give you a sense of size, 1,500 to like 2,000 lawyers. Then there's a massive gap. And then you have like the bulk of law firms sitting somewhere around 50 to 200, 150 lawyers, which are also full service in the sense that they will do a decent number of practice areas, except for like the niche practice areas. And then you have, of course, like the boutiques and what have yous and the independent chambers that are all of that. So that is how the legal services market servicing more complex clients and bigger clients ends up being. But that's obviously in the bigger cities and for the bigger clients. The smaller cities work very, very differently. So the second you go to a tier 2 or a tier 3 city, which is, by the way, majority of India, right, in terms of number. I'm not saying that's where probably the money is sitting, but this is the majority of India. You'll end up mostly going to individual lawyers or much smaller law firms that are very, very local and regional in nature. Also because you're a quasi-federation, so like state laws tend to be different, jurisdictions tend to run that way. So yeah, as you can imagine, it's like extremely split and not consolidated at all. So that's what the Indian market looks like. In terms of differences, so one, according to the Bar Council of India, only advocates can give legal advise and own law firms. So there is no alternative business structures or no non-lawyer ownership per se in India. The second really is that there is no apparent liberalization. So effectively, foreign lawyers can't come to Indian practice. There has been a bill, it's been pending for a while. But it hasn't really been approved in it. There is decent amount of opposition locally around this. And in terms of just going back to the point of how big the market is, so we're not a very litigious market. People will only go to a lawyer as a last resort. But because of that, and also because generally, in terms of what lawyers charge, get paid, and just general economy of India, when you look at the revenues, right, it makes perfect sense against what the hourly rate is for a lawyer. But then when you start comparing rupee revenue to like a pound revenue or a dollar revenue, starts to look really, really small. So one of the biggest law firms' revenue is going to be mostly comparable to a mid-sized law firm in UK when you like do the conversion.
Yeah. No, it is such a complex market. And I think you've done a great job there of just painting the the picture of it. Lots to unpack there. Maybe just to start outside of law, what's the situation on the ground there in terms of adoption of AI? So obviously it's an enormous population. It's the largest democracy in the world. Is it a country that is adopting AI at the consumer level? How's the distribution of technology, access to the internet, and sufficiently fast data to make use of these services? Where's India at, I guess, as a country on its AI journey before we get into the legal tech part of it?
I think a decent framework to understand how India is sort of structured is you have India 1, India 2, India 3. So India 1 is everyone in the most metropolitan cities doing more knowledge jobs and have access to whatever is there and available. And when you start looking at those sort of cities, you'll just be like, really? Is a startup solving for this? So you would go to a Bangalore and there would be a cafe and there will also be just like a pick and drop of a power bank, because they know if you go to the garden next to the cafe, you will need a power bank and you can just like put it back. So there is that, right? There will be a startup solving for everything. Everyone has internet. Everyone's almost tuned into what's happening and is using ChatGPT free version. And actually, there's like a special pricing for ChatGPT in India. So there's like a bigger uptick just generally of that tool. So that is there for sure. This India 2 is the India that sort of services India 1. So that'll be people who are working in restaurants or driving cabs and what have yous. And there is a bit of a split. So some people have smartphones and therefore have access. They don't have traditional machines and traditional desktops. So that sort of forecloses them. But for the population within that has smartphones will have access to the internet and will be tuned in. So I think one of the biggest and the things to look at that has come out of India is the unified payment infrastructure, the UPI. Really, what it does is brings together QR codes and banking infrastructure and makes it almost seamless. So I can just like scan a QR and make a payment. And that has really blown up. We've not carried cards or digital, like sort of just like hard cash in these bigger cities. But the second you go to a smaller city, or if you're interacting with India too, that doesn't have a smartphone, which by the way is a lot of them, you then will start to realize that there is therefore no internet or no access to internet. And there are still villages that are completely media dark. Like there are no newspapers, there is no way to reach them. So because of all of this, there are some very interesting sort of solutions coming that are still like AI based and voice based, because AI makes all of that possible. So there is that layer there. So I want to say they are still tuned in, maybe not directly accessing AI. And a quick example of this is that there are now helplines that are using AI. So for insurance and insurance claims, there's something called Insurance Samadhan. You can just call them, explain what your issue is, why your insurance is not getting approved in any language. And India has a lot of languages. It'll then transcribe, make sense of it, help you make a claim, keep talking to you on a phone, because that's what you have access to, and no smarter interface, and get you across the line.
It's really interesting. It reminds me, I had Dr. Sarah Stevens from Sussex University on the podcast a few weeks back. She's done a lot of work in Tanzania around access to justice. And obviously every country is different, but there are some parallels, I think, there with perhaps India 2, India 3, you just described, where perhaps people don't necessarily have smartphones or continuous access to the internet, maybe sometimes using feature phones. And she and her team had built a tool to enable particularly women to get access to legal support through SMS or phone, but without needing to go on the internet. Do you see opportunities for more of that kind of access to justice work in India? Because I noticed earlier you said, well, it's not particularly litigious society and going to a lawyer is a last resort. Is that because there isn't the demand there, or is that because that, there is demand, but the idea of being able to go find a lawyer, engage with a lawyer and pay a lawyer is just so far out of reach for vast swathes of the population?
Yeah. I'm going to respond to the second one first. So you're right. It's very difficult to sort of find a lawyer, engage them and what have you. But it's also something that I mentioned earlier, which is that people aren't fully aware when there has been a breach of their rights or infringement of their rights, and there is a cause for justice. And a lot in that sense tends to be because of how it has been structured over time, and also the fact that pendency is massive, right? Let's say even if you do find a lawyer and you end up going to file a case, you probably won't see the resolution of that matter in your lifetime unless you're using one of the alternative dispute resolutions, a mechanism which also there's a lot of innovation in, and I'll come to that in a minute. So all of that really sort of does two things. One, accessing a lawyer or accessing a way to resolve the issue of justice, but also just like understanding what your rights are and building literacy around that. Which, as you can understand, is like a massive, massive task in itself, given the population and the fact that there is a different dialect every sort of 100 kilometers, let alone a different language. And we have 21 official languages that are all of that. So like complexity keeps sort of increasing.
Trey, can I just
Yeah.
ask a dumb question on the languages
Yeah.
front? Obviously, I spend my day not only talking to AI, but talking to AI in English, ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot or whatever it is that I'm using on a day-to-day basis. Are all of those languages support the different languages and the dialects and things in India? Are they well supported by the AI tools, or is that a gap that needs to be filled?
There is definitely a gap, and there is one big company that's solving for it, but there are like a load of other startups also solving for it. So because everything that's the chat GPT or the most of the LLMs are really good with like Latin origin languages, but not so great at other languages, especially when the script changes. And most of Indian languages are on a completely different script, and that adds to complexity. And while it does a decently okay job at most recognized languages, because there has been enough corpus across just like the judiciary or the government to train it on those languages. The dialects, it has very little tune in on, and even on those languages, specifically around the South Indian languages, doesn't do as well. So there are now India language specific models with benchmarks that are available that are filling in that gap.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. If you could just talk a bit more about the legal tech scene in India. So I think you've painted a really useful picture of the market as a whole and the legal services market, but you're uniquely well placed, I think, to talk about the legal tech landscape as well. Where are we at with legal tech in India? Are we seeing a lot of homegrown players and startups launching? Some of the big players have set up operations there. What does the landscape for legal tech specifically look like in India right now?
I'll do this in sort of like two parts. One, what is happening and what is homegrown, and second, what's really happening in terms of established players. So in terms of homegrown, if you look at any of the listings, we have about now close to 1,000 startups, which by the way, for context, is only second highest to US. Like US has the most number of legal tech startups. Obviously, it's like a massive market. But India, because generally is very entrepreneurial, there will be a startup, people are very high risk taking, etc., etc. We have that number of startups. Of course, a lot of them do tend to overlap in terms of the kind of solutions they are providing with some sort of nuances, but it works out because it's just such a fragmented market. And a lot of them also then end up sort of building out to selling to the rest of the world as well. So Spot Draft is now established in US and has now been entering the UK market and the European market. There are two legal AI players also. One is called Lucio. Lucio just set up its New York office and is selling to US law firms. And that is aspirationally what most legal tech startups want to do at some level, because one, like I mentioned, the market isn't as big when you start to go out to sell. The TAM isn't big. And second, when you sell in rupee, you aren't really making the kind of profits that you would otherwise make if you build in India, build with Indian developers. And of course, I'm sure you know, we have like one of the best developers and that entire talent sitting in India. And then end up selling in like a different currency, the profit margin is significantly different. And that tends to be the aspiration of most legal tech startups. So that's where we are at in terms of just numbers. In terms of category, there is actually something quite interesting. So online dispute resolution is become one of our most mature and one of our biggest categories in India, because there's been a lot of push both from regulation side of things. So there's now a mediation act. We've had our own arbitration act. There have been plugs in other acts pushing people to alternative dispute resolution for MSME conflicts or consumer disputes or what have you. And then, of course, the regulatory bodies have also been working with ODR players. And I want to mention what SEBI has done. So SEBI has actually now said that all investor disputes will go through an ODR platform. And within that, they have set up a panel of ODR platforms, which you could choose from where you want to go. And that platform is then going to facilitate the entire process end to end. And so not only that, they've also using something called the Pulse protocol. So even on the infrastructure level, almost like a UPI, there is now an open access API.
And UPI, Shreya, is the payments
The
infrastructure
payments,
you were
yeah,
talking about.
exactly. And
Yeah.
it's built on an infrastructure, right? Where every payments app can get on it, every bank can get on it. Similarly, there's now something called Pulse, where every ODR provider can get on it. And every financial institute, let's say, for example, that has disputes or like has grievances can get on it and get access to that entire thing. And it's an open API. So at a level, India is trying to solve it also for the infrastructure. So there's always scale. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that India can give to the rest of the world, which is always solving for scale. Anyway, so like all of that has actually fed into ODR being one of the most mature categories in the legal tech ecosystem and legal tech space in India.
Okay, so you've got these huge number of homegrown startups. I think you said 1,000 startups, second only to the US, which is incredible. And I suspect not many people listening will know that actually, that India is really a startup factory for legal tech startups. And the most successful of these, I suppose it sounds like, or at least an aspiration for many of them, is to scale in India, but then beyond India into other markets as well. What about the other direction? So I think we've seen at least one or two of the big legal AI players set up offices there or operations there. And sometimes with India, when people say they're setting up an office there, there's a perception that, are you setting up an office there? To your point about India has some of the best developers in the world and the most cost-effective developers in the world. There's a perception when someone sets up an office, is it just a development operation, or is it actually a go-to-market operation where they are looking to sell to Indian law firms? What's happening in terms of international legal tech companies trying to get into India, and how do they navigate the reality on the ground, which you've touched on several times in this discussion, which is the revenues of even the largest firms there are probably at best what you would call mid-size in other parts of the world. Is there a way to scale into that market in a way that's actually profitable? Or do you think some of these firms are building there for the long term, get in today and ride the wave of economic growth that we hope is going to come in?
So that actually also brings me to the second part, right? All these international players that have been established also entering India. So you're right. They have been for a very long time using India as a hub for knowledge workers, whether it's developers or ops or customer success or what have yous. Thomson Reuters has like a 3,000 person office, and Pramata has had a very big office in Bangalore for a very long time. So this is a very established model, right? To get knowledge workers who work with these international players. And to that extent, I think there has been a lot of maturity within pockets. So e-discovery has been very big in India in terms of like setup, et cetera, et cetera. Just like you said, legal tech development has been very big. So that is one model that has worked out very well. With the entrant of these bigger legal AI startups, right? So Harvey now has an office and Legora now has an office. I think it's a bit of both. One, they're obviously tapping into what is possible with getting local talent in India and how that feeds back into their product or all of the other operational elements of running a company. The second is they are targeting India and the biggest law firms. because the biggest law firms obviously do also offer their services to international clients, and that expectation is like massively changing. But also at some level, there are all of these MNCs, their in-house departments that also sit in India. And by the way, now there are a load of in-house departments that are setting up and have been offshoring and sort of creating like capability centers in India. And that's like the next biggest wave in terms of knowledge work for India. So GCCs have existed in India for GCCs slash GBSs are what they called in India for a very long time. But up until now, they would mostly look at your IT, finance, some bits of HR ops. And that's what would like get plucked out of your main company and then be offshored to India. And not offshoring in the sense of there's a third party servicing it, offshoring in the sense of it's captive, it is your company, they are your employees, but it's just being serviced from that there locally. The latest to add to this panel of ops is now legal for companies. And there is a massive flow of legal work from in-house departments across the world in bigger MNCs being moved to India. And I think there is GTM and a sales aspect that a lot of international companies are eyeing at.
So are you talking about outsourced legal services, so like ALSPs,
They
alternative
aren't
legal service providers?
in the sense of it. They are literally captive in. So this is, for example, if I take a very big company like HP, so you have HP Global, but there'll be an HP India, which will also be the legal department there would also be servicing questions and queries coming from fairly across the jurisdictions. Yeah. And they just don't do document review and what have you. They're fully ingrained in the ecosystem, have access to everything that other lawyers would probably have access to. But the efficiencies are coming from, of course, some kind of labor arbitrage, but also a lot of innovation and usage of tech.
Yeah. When we think about international players trying to scale into the India market, are there things that they're getting wrong when they try and sell into India? Are they just going to get laughed out the room if they show up with their US pricing? And are there other things that they're getting wrong? And related to that, it seems to me, Shreya, like you and your network are uniquely well placed to almost act as a bridge between India and the rest of the world, whether that's international players from the US or the UK looking to get into India, or Indian players looking to scale into the rest of the world. Is two questions in one here? I'm sorry. Is that something that you see as a role for the Indian legal tech network? And if so, how do people tap into that? How can they contact you or the network? How can they work with you on that?
Sure. Sorry, I'm so focused on the second question that I completely.
Oh, that's all right. Take the second question. I have no short-term memory. I can't even remember what the first question was.
No, I remember now. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So,
Good.
on pricing, so most people who haven't tried to do an India entry and do cold reach do have that issue, because I've also been on the other side sitting within a law firm looking at products. And the first question is usually, what is the pricing? What is the price point at? Which is not to say that if you are a very well-established player and there is just that requirement that we need the tool, that law firms are going to massively shy away from it. So I think iManager is a very good example of this, very well established in India. And the pricing isn't extremely different. I mean, of course, there's some like correction, just keeping in mind the fact that India is a different market, but it's not some insane discounting to that extent. So that does, like, if you have a the expectation is other people are going to expect you to use like a DMS and what have you, and your clients need that, etc. That then works out. Apart from that, there is always that question around price, which never goes away. The second question is also around customer support, because a lot of these teams aren't sitting in the Indian time zone or just like Southeast Asian time zone. They're sitting in the UK and the US, especially US, and that doesn't work out very well for buyers of legal tech from that ecosystem, especially when it's being set up and rolled out and all of that. It helps if you have like an India setup to that extent, and that becomes like a pain point in that entire journey. And another thing in all of this, which just sort of, I think, is something that other players can do a lot better while entering the Indian market, especially with now with LLMs, is have context around what's happening in India, because our judgments, the way our judiciary is set up, the way our laws are written, the way that like one of the biggest things that these legal AI startups don't solve for is translation, and translation is like our first use case. So just being much more aware of the on-ground reality of lawyers, even at bigger law firms who are mostly practicing in English. If I am a lawyer, I am expected to know some local language, like engage with people who are going to be on the ground speaking in a different language and be able to communicate what I want. Sure, we have people who liaise with us, but I'm just faster, right? If I know what the local language is. And there are obviously cases for bigger law firms where we will get like a local counsel doing that for us. But I think those are the things that companies that are entering India don't really pay enough attention to unless they are on ground or have someone on ground sort of advising them. How can the Indian legal tech network help? So one, massively with awareness of who you are, how you are uniquely positioned to solve a problem, and have that problem reframed in the context of what the reality of lawyers in India is, because that problem isn't like a problem in US isn't really the exact same problem in India. That is one. Second, also to connect you with the right stakeholders, because now our members sit across all sorts of stakeholder personas and all sorts of legal buyers slash sellers of service across the market. How can you reach out? There is a website and there is an email address, which is contact@indianlegaltech.net. And the website is the same, indianlegaltech.net.
Excellent. We'll put that in the show notes. I wanted to move away from India just for the last sort of five minutes here, Shreya, and cover a couple of things if we can. The first is you won an award not too long ago, very deservedly, which was influential women in legal tech. So massive congratulations.
Thank you so
and
much.
very well deserved. We were chatting just briefly before we came on about the reality right now, which is that women are underrepresented in certainly legal tech startups. You know, when you look at the big funding rounds and the big VC events, women are underrepresented. What more do we need to be doing as an industry to address that?
I think the biggest issue is funding, and this is not just for legal tech, right? Like, just there's like 3% funding that flows to female founders, and it's almost become like a boys' club where the funders are also part of that, and the people asking for funding are also part of that, and that's becoming slightly difficult to break that cycle. Of course, there are very dedicated funds that exist generally across the startup ecosystem looking at female founders, but that is not the case in legal tech yet at all. And I don't think we're doing enough to that extent. And there are some very specific targeted things that we can do, especially because when you come on the buyer side of things, the heads of innovation or the heads of knowledge or what have yous are mostly women. And there are women sitting in those rooms. And we can create some very dedicated spaces, right? So if your firm is running an incubation center, have a dedicated seat that only goes to female founders or female founders first, should you not get anyone else. Same thing goes for all the bigger, more dedicated legal tech funds or funds which have a hypothesis around legal tech to just dedicatedly source and say that this amount of the funding will only go to a team that has a female founder on the team. And even otherwise, right? And this is something that's come up in another conversation that we were having at Beacon Collective, which Elena runs, about just if you are in it, right, and you are a decision maker and you are a woman and you have wanted to invest or like just generally have some money that can help someone else get across, like to just get like 1 month extra runway, invest in a female founder. Just like take that leap of faith and give back in that very directed and intentional sense.
I think it's great advice. I think you've laid out some other very much bigger things around the funding that needs to be resolved. I wanted to talk also just briefly, I know we're going to run out of time here, around two other things. One One is AI native law firms. So you've spoken at length in the past about um, the learnings from factories. And when we moved from steam power to electricity, I think there was a 20 or 30-year period where actually a lot of the factories just switched out the steam powered instruments for electricity powered instruments, but they didn't change the design of the factory. It was still the same layout, the same process, maybe slightly faster. Is that what we're seeing in law firms right now? And where are we on that journey? Because we all know factories were ultimately redesigned, but where are we on that process?
Yeah, I think very much. I think still AI is seen as a tool and not as a medium for transformational change within law firms. We're still thinking of it as what can it do better based on the tasks that you're doing right now and the jobs that you're doing right now. But the power of AI is that your job will change and the tasks that you end up doing is going to completely change. And then, of course, there are all of those ripple effects. It's going to change how you resource, how you train, what is your business model, where is the value, what do you really sell to your clients. And I think most law firms haven't sat down with that very, very difficult question to be like, okay, as knowledge workers and professional services, where is the value layer? And then work backwards from there to understand how AI is going to transform that. It's still very much like, and that is very telling in all you can look at any legal tech company's website, right? Draft 20% faster, research 30% faster. These are still tasks and activities that lawyers do today. And I think that's going to completely change. We're still very much in the I'm going to use electricity for a steam engine phase.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think so much opportunity for um, new entrants or even actually existing large players to ask themselves, what would legal practice look like if we designed it from the ground up
Yeah.
today? Sometimes the factory layout that we have right now doesn't need, in my view, doesn't necessarily need to change. You know, there are some of the company matters that absolutely should be majority or almost exclusively human delivered via the hourly rate process, etc. It's not always the wrong answer, but there are categories of work where we do need to redesign the factory.
Yeah.
I guess, just building on that, and we're going to run out of time inevitably, but perhaps last question, Shreya, are you feeling positive about the impact that AI is going to have on the industry? And what's the change that you'd like to see in law, in legal services in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
I think AI has given us for the first time, I want to say opportunity, but we're almost being pushed against the wall at this point of time to rethink how we've been doing things for so long. And I think a great comparison in my head is how much the medical profession, which has the same sort of burden of ethics and there are lives at stake there as well, and how much they have evolved and adapted and like constantly changed to ensure that that the experience of the patient has completely evolved and changed. And I think we have sadly not done that to the extent that has always been possible, which right now, because of how accessible this tech is, not just to law firms, but also to the clients of the law firms, we're being forced to rethink really what we do and how we provide. And that's also true not just in this setup, right? It's also true across lawyers and solicitors and their clients and how they're approaching and just generally how this entire profession has worked in the past. And I think it's a great opportunity to rethink what we've been doing wrong all these years in the name of perhaps precedent or perhaps not being very, very experimental or being slightly risk averse. Though most people aren't anymore, so I don't want to stick with that label. And I think it's going to do a lot of shift in where the value is in the profession, like that entire thing shifting. It's going to have massive, massive impact on access to justice. And that's what really excites me because it's making things possible which weren't possible at all a few years ago in that space. And really, I think it's going to be a great opportunity to improve the rule of law.
Well, I think great insights and a great place to end. Massive thank you, Shreya, for making the time. So useful to hear your thoughts, not just on the market in India, but actually on where the industry is now and where it's going. I think you've achieved so much already, and I know there'll be folks will be watching closely to see what you're building next. So keep building cool things and building on the impact that you're already having. And thanks again.
Thank you so much, Matt, for having me. It was a great I mean, I feel like we can do this for another hour, but we'll spare the audience.
We'll make it a weekly one, Shreya. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks again, and we'll speak very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.